Hi, this is Glenn Loury, The Glenn Show, at Substack and at YouTube. You know how to find us. I'm with John McWhorter. Every other week, John and I talk, for the record, here at The Glenn Show. I'm at Brown University. John is at Columbia University. He also writes twice a week for the New York Times, where he continues to distinguish himself. How you doing, John?
I am utterly exhausted, but that's better than being bored. How are you?
It is indeed better than being bored. I'm too busy running hither and yon. This is the third podcast conversation in 2 days that I will have recorded by the time we're done with this. I had a wonderful conversation, though, which will be posted shortly with Sam Harris, the distinguished neuroscientist and philosopher and podcaster. So that was his first time on the Glenn Show, and that was very much worth doing. But I mean, there's just too much on the plate here, man. Just too much.
You know, there's one thing that I notice. It's hard that people don't always process, because you see somebody who's maybe in the public and you see them as one thing, and it's natural. I mean, I do it too, but I find that it's not always clear to some people out there when you get asked to do things, and I'm happy to do it, but they don't seem to understand that we have jobs. There are people who don't seem to quite get that, we teach classes almost every day. And I find sometimes I'm confounding people, because they'll say, okay, such and such is happening at 3:00 p.m. on Thursday. And I think to myself, I don't remember the last time I was available at 3:00 p.m. on a Thursday, except in the summer. We teach. But yeah, it's hard to teach and do all of this. I'm not complaining, but it's a lot. It's and the new podcast economy is such that it's basically as if every third person has their own radio show. And so there's just so much to do. But yeah, better than not, as far as I'm concerned.
This makes me think that there must be a business opportunity, and maybe this app already exists. There's so much content. Think about it on the other side, on the consumer side. How do you
I pity
pick
consumers
and choose?
These days.
People, you might be missing a lot of really good stuff that you don't know about. You might be wasting time on stuff that, you watch, but you don't get as much out of as you could have gotten. Somebody needs to consolidate. There needs to be like a podcast access portal or reference portal, reviewing, cataloging, keeping people aware of what's going on, because there's a gazillion posts going up every month.
Yep. Yep. I know some people who are doing things like that, because, I was thinking about getting into podcasts. I figured this is what everybody's doing, and I must be missing things that are no longer being written down. But I was just dazzled by how much there is. I couldn't even begin to pick. So except for on some of my narrow favorite subjects, but on the bigger stuff, wow. Yeah, it was overwhelming.
We're part of the problem on the supply side, putting out, and in the Glenn Show, every week there's a new conversation. John and I, twice a month, plus the Q&A stuff that we do.
I don't know how you do it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. You say we have day jobs, and I do have a day job, but I'm actually literally contemplating maybe it's time to, step aside a little bit from some of my responsibilities at the university to, I hate to use the word retire, because I'm much too young and good looking to retire. And I love teaching. My teaching has been going wonderfully the last few weeks. And I get such joy out of interacting with the young people and whatnot. But, it might be time to move on to the next phase, take an emeritus status, maybe teach a class every one or two classes every year, free up that corner office that I'm occupying, that I'm sure my younger colleagues have their eye on, and say he's never in there. He's taking up all that. He's got that good light, the built-in bookcases, which because of seniority, I can, it almost doesn't feel fair for me to take the adequate salary, more than adequate salary that they're paying, when I know that I'm past my prime as a reproductive research scholar and whatnot. I mean, it's not unfair. It's not unfair. I've earned it, and I am producing value for the university. But I don't know. And
Most people would expect that you were emeritus by now and teaching maybe one course a year, one course a semester. Yeah, definitely.
At the age past 70, there's no mandatory retirement. I can stay until they carry me out foot first if I want to. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of people at my age have transitioned to emeritus and, are living a quieter life. Mm-hmm. They have this conference that's been organized in May, which you are invited to, and I was happy to see that you confirmed your attendance. That's very exciting. Where it's built around my scholarly and public intellectual contributions over the course of a long career, over 40 years in this business of higher education, and co-authors, students, colleagues are coming from all over to gather in Providence and celebrate the productive academic life and intellectual contributions of your humble servant here. And I'm very honored and pleased by that, and I'm grateful that you'll be able to participate, John. I really am.
I will be there.
But it seems like that's an appropriate time, to say, okay, great.
Yeah.
My initial contributions have been recognized and honored. Let's have the orderly transition to the next phase of the program here.
In the movie, that would be your retirement party. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's such a harsh word. But I'm saying all that to say this, what we're doing, every third person has their own radio show, and I'm one of those people, is a lot of fun. It almost doesn't feel like work. You get to talk to a wide range of people about interesting stuff. You get feedback from the public. You have an impact on the national conversation, a modest little impact. You represent something that you care about. You stand up for something. We're the woke busters here at the Glenn Show. We don't take no stuff from the social justice warrior zealots. John, I saw your piece. I'm just rambling here. I saw your piece about Jeffrey Lieberman, mm-hmm. the psychiatrist who seems to be getting canceled for that poorly worded, ill-considered tweet that he put out where he used freak of nature phraseology in the context of praising, as you note, a South Sudanese American model whose name escapes me at the moment, but you'll bring us up to date on that. Can we talk about that for a minute? What's your take on that brouhaha?
Well, he wrote a tweet where he's expressing that he finds her beautiful. Her dark skin has been commented upon. And he says, whether she's something or a freak of nature, she's absolutely beautiful. Now,
I think a work of art.
Work of art, right, or a freak of nature. Now, here he is. He's this guy in a position of responsibility, and he's basically, putting out this public tweet saying that someone is hot. That's not appropriate. It's tacky. And I think anybody would understand that. Apparently, he was missing a little bit of social grace on that. That's the sort of thing that the equivalent of which you could get away with 30 or 40 years ago, but it's not the way things go now. And all I question, but it's a very important thing to question, is why does he have to lose his jobs or be suspended? It was a tacky tweet, certainly, but the whole thing is being conducted, first of all, with people pretending not to understand how language and expression work. So he's not calling her a freak. Yes, there have been people who have treated black women as circus freaks or thought of black women as freakish in various ways. He used an expression that the word freak is harbored in. He said freak of nature. Freak of nature has a meaning different from the word freak alone. It means something that is good. Freak of nature is praise. Usain Bolt, the runner, was described as a freak of nature in the media just 5 years ago, and no one said a thing. So it was clumsy, though, partly because some people will pretend to think that he was calling her a freak. In this era, he should have been aware that there were going to be some people recreationally reading him that way. And then also, what is he doing? Calling a woman hot in a tweet from his position. However, what in the world are we doing firing him for it? He should be sanctioned. He should be made to feel like a fool. It should be very embarrassing. All of that would be bad enough. And society would learn through the fact that he would be hung out to dry. It would be discussed. It would be considered disgusting. But why in the world does he have to lose his job? Why does it become something out of an Arthur Miller play? Why does he have to be chased out of employment? And I think it's excessive. It's just the punishment is far beyond what the crime deserves.
Do you remember exactly what the punishment was? Excuse me.
The punishment was, and to be honest, I'm a little undercaffeinated, but he lost one job, was suspended from another one, and stepped down from a third.
This is one of the most prominent psychiatrists in the country, right? I mean, he's like chief of psychiatry at a big medical center.
At Columbia. That's right. So yeah, 1, fired, 2, stepped down because he would have been fired, 3, suspended. His life is deeply altered forever. And frankly, why? Now, some people would say that this is progress, that this is the way it should have been 10 years ago. And my question is, why? How is this progress? And I'm not sure anybody would be able to have an answer to that.
Well, he's being made an example of so that others coming after him will be more careful about how they refer to Black women who are often sexualized and exoticized, if that's a word. Is that a word, Mr. Linguist? Is exoticizing a word?
Exotify, I think.
Exotify.
Or I've seen exoticize, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's like, let's teach modern America not to be like mid-20th century America and how they think about Black women. So the next person coming along will think twice before they repair to those kinds of
and references. I agree with that, but you'd have the same effect by sanctioning him in public and having an excoriating discussion about it. That would embarrass him deeply, and that would ward off other, guys, especially aging guys, who didn't get the message, that you can't do that. Why does he have to lose his job? And I think what that is this new mood that is more about smoking out heretics than seeking progress. They're treating him like he's dirty. And many people would say, well, he is. But why wouldn't people have felt that way just 5 or 6 years ago? What's the progress? I don't see it. I think that it's gotten to the point that there's a certain joy in the punishment, or there's a certain show that a certain kind of person feels we're all supposed to put on. And I don't get it. And a lot of people seem to think that this kind of excess makes sense where race is concerned, because race is America's stain, et cetera. I don't see it. You could have had the same effect on society by embarrassing the man and criticizing the man. You didn't need to destroy his life. I don't get it.
On this freak of nature thing, man, I follow the Boston Celtics. It's a good basketball team, everybody. Watch out, we're coming. And the local cable channel that broadcasts the games has a couple of guys, I don't remember their names now, who are the commentators on the broadcast. They regularly refer to 6'9" people with a 8-foot wingspan when they stretch like that, who can leap 3 feet off the ground from a standing position without blinking an eye, as freaks of nature. They regularly use that phrase. It's laudatory, and it's meant to say, you don't see anybody doing that walking down the street. That's something that is extremely unusual, rare, and special talent, whatever. They don't mean any harm in doing it. And I expect that Jeffrey Lieberman had more or less the same meaning in mind when he employed that phrase.
Somebody white says something wrong and gets criticized, and you're the Black guy who defends the person. And the truth is, I will, because I really do think that an injustice is being done in this notion that we are so delicate that we need people to be fired and to have their lives destroyed for one thing that they say in a less than graceful way. Poor Sandra Sellers at Georgetown, the law professor, says that the Black students are clustering in the bottom of her class, has her life destroyed. I've heard that she was destroyed by this, not just in losing the job, but that she's shattered. All of that is just not necessary. It's injustice to the people. It's injustice to us and making us look like poster children. And I really do feel that these things need to be said because a great many Black people feel the same way. I feel like I'm representing a view that we don't get enough of. Just because you see the other view from the people who happen to cluster in the media and academia doesn't mean that's the only way Black people think. But so I apologize to some people if it seems like I'm writing the same column over and over, but I'm going to write that column now and then in the future too, because there needs to be it needs to be represented that not all Black people feel that we need to be treated in this way.
We're just moving on over here. We're moving on. What did I want to ask you? The inward policing. Isn't the freak of nature policing and the inward police, aren't they kind of cousins to one another somehow? And isn't the word Negro, which is in the sights of these people, would you fall on your sword to protect the word Negro? Not because you want to use it, but because it's a legitimate word that has a very long and dignified history in the linguistic culture of African Americans from the 19th and 20th century. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to ban the word Negro, which is not the Nigger word. It's a different word with a capital N. The Negro of the mid 20th century was a dignified person. I mean, so the American Negro is a phraseology that you'll find in social textbooks and in history, in journalism, the advancement of the American Negro, the history of the American United Negro Improvement Association. Isn't that what Marcus Garvey called his organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So that's a question about language policing and whether or not something is worth fighting for, and does Negro fall within that in that frame?
There are a few things that make it clearer that there's a certain kind of person who gets off on being offended, that it's becoming wrong in some circles to even use the word Negro. And we end up shooting ourselves in the foot because so many wonderful things that we did in the past are called Negro. And so, for example, one of the best classical pieces one of the old-time Black classical composers wrote was called Negro Folk Symphony. It's by William Levi Dawson. That's what he called it because he's in black and white pictures. That's what it was called. Negro Folk Symphony. Do you know that there are conductors across the United States who are refraining from performing the piece because they're afraid of its title and they don't want to get in trouble because of these people who are pretending that there's something wrong with the word Negro? It's now considered a little bit risky to deal with the piece because of its name. And so the people who are pretending to be offended by the use of the word Negro are creating things like that. And Negro isn't a slur at all. But it's funny. I'm looking at a book right now. It's a gathering of pieces on race that the New York Times did about 20 years ago. It was actually a very good volume. It was called How Race Has Lived in America. And I remember there was one piece in that was about a rapper. And I'll never forget, I still remember the phrase. A white reporter is interviewing this aspiring rapper, a young Black man, and he actually says, "I'm valid when I'm disrespected." He actually lays that out. The validity, you sense a legitimacy, you sense yourself as important when you can complain about the fact that somebody is disrespecting you. He openly says it about that strain in his own music. And, that is something that describes a whole Black sensibility. Not all Black people. I suspect it's not the majority, but it's overrepresented among the people who have the pulpit of the media and academia and the written word. And so, you've got the N word, and the truth is that people actually using it, it's relatively rare, and it's only one thing, and maybe you get a little bored, and so you start looking for other things to be offended about. So how about Negro? But it serves no purpose because there are Black people really suffering, and you should be channeling your energy into that. It's based on something that doesn't make any damn sense, and yet you insist it does. And so non-Black people stand by pretending you're making sense, but quietly thinking that there's something wrong with you. And it ends up meaning that people avoid discussing things that have that word in it. If you can't say Negro, you can't read out loud half of what Martin Luther King wrote. And that's really becoming an issue. Or you have to read it with, saying, N-word or something like that. This isn't the way things should be. I've written that piece. I did that in the Times. It's just, no, we don't need to make Negro into the new slur. Why do we need to have a slur to be offended about? What kind of frame of mind is that?
But it's not a slur. I mean, nigger is a slur. You call somebody something with the intention of injury. unless you're a rapper, referring to the guy on the corner who's also a rapper and is getting more downloads than you're getting. And, that nigga ain't got nothing going that I don't, et cetera. Negro is not a slur. It is this is a manufactured offense, it would appear to me. There's no intention in the use of the word Negro to denigrate. Whereas the N-word can be used in such a way where it's very clear that the intention of the speaker is to denigrate. The word Negro with a capital N is merely a word. It doesn't have that connotation at all, at least as far as I'm aware.
Never did. But it sounds kind of like the N-word. And so people have decided that we're supposed to be offended about it because black people are only real if we're offended.
The question one is, what then should black people be called? Should we be called black? Should we be called African American, et cetera? And two, why is this issue of how black people are referred to and the sanitizing and policing of it so vitally important? Is there any comparable set of debates that goes on for other identity groups? I don't know, Jews or Italians or Irish or whatever. This question to you,
I
Mr.
remember,
Linguist.
and no, not to my knowledge, people are not as obsessed with this issue of what one is called. And so, for example, an analogy, at some point in the late 80s, Hispanic went out of fashion in certain circles, and we started saying Latino. Yeah. But notice that Hispanic is not treated as a slur. It's still around. You see it on paper. Many Latinos still refer to themselves as Hispanic. Nobody is going to throw a rock at you if you use Hispanic. Latinos don't seem to be as caught in this obsession with what we're going to be called, except, frankly, a certain group of academic Latinos who would, I think, vociferously disagree with me. But in the neighborhood I live in Queens, i.e. Latino people living real lives, I can quite definitely say that Hispanic is not a slur. And for some of them, Latino is a little bit pretentious. And it just means that they are more concerned with real life rather than these names. It's one of these fish don't know their wet things, because it seems so ordinary that black people, some, are that concerned with the names and whether you're going to capitalize black or not. I remember I sat in on a class on black film when I was a grad student at Stanford. When I was naive, I'm 25, and I just wanted to learn some stuff about black film. So every week I think we had to watch a black film. We had watch one, and then we would have this discussion. I only lasted 4 or 5 classes because I thought we were going to learn about black people in the movies from the dawn of time until then. And it was an important time then because there had been the new spate of black movies, starting with Spike Lee's work and John Singleton's work. But that wasn't it. Tacitly, the idea was that the discussion was going to be about stereotyping and racism. And of course, you're going to talk about stereotyping and racism. You can't see Birth of a Nation and not talk about it. But as we started moving through the century, I saw that all anybody wanted to talk about was racism, as if that's the only interesting thing to say about all the things that black people have been doing in the movies for, over a century now. So I just had to go. I realized this is not a class about black film. This is a class about racism, where we use films to stimulate conversations about how the white man is, doing bad things to the black community. That was typical. And that's what this name thing is. The essence of blackness is complaint and anger and being offended. It does us in. I honestly believe that.
Now I'm told that there is, in reaction to the word Latinx, a rebellion in some quarters of the Hispanic community. I use those words advisedly, but I'm thinking about Chicano Mexican-American people in Texas and California who might object to Latinx. What do you have to say about that? What's the genesis of Latinx, and what's the nature of the objection?
Well, the idea of Latinx is to avoid mentioning gender with the word, because Latino is a masculine, Latina is feminine. The idea is to get beyond that kind of binary by saying Latin X. And that's a concern that certain Latino people, mostly academic and in journalism, have. But the thing is, it's a term that is not catching on remotely with most Latinos. Most Latinos don't feel that erasing that indication of gender is especially important. Some people are offended by it. And the truth is, X is a weird letter. The word Latinx could be argued arbitrarily to be rather ugly. You don't want to say it all the time. And so, yeah, there is pushback. The way I see it is that it's a register thing. Latinx is going to catch on among a certain kind of highly educated person, but it's never going to have any purchase on the community. I don't know if that's wrong.
So is this related to the pronoun issue about transgender identity?
Yeah, it is.
That is, you,
and I think
you
the
force a
pronoun
person
issue,
to, by saying Latino or Latina, you force the person to identify as one or the other, and some people may not feel that they are appropriately assigned to one or the other of those categories.
Or they think that we shouldn't refer to people that way. We should get past the idea of seeing people divided between, boy and girl. That's fine with me, but it's to have that concern be so central is not how most of the people concerned feel. And I don't think they're going to. And so there's just going to be a practice among a certain highly educated segment of people. To the extent that they try to force that terminology on others, that's going to be a problem because there's going to be resistance. But I'm not sure how much they're trying to force it. They should just realize that they're creating a register of their own.
If you're someone like me who's constantly bombarded with news from a digital landscape you just can't seem to trust, Ground News is for you. For every breaking news story, they'll show you which media outlets are reporting on the issue and where they fall on the political spectrum, so you can instantly spot media bias, discover stories outside of your echo chamber, and get some clarity in this increasingly chaotic world. The Ground News website and app lets you compare headlines from left, center, and right sources with a simple swipe. And their blind spot feed will show you stories that are not being reported by one side of the political spectrum. Subscribers can also gain access to features like My News Bias, which lets you track your reading habits so you can see how factual your sources are, who owns them, and much more. Ground isn't better news, it's a better way to consume it. Get all of your news in one place. Download the Ground News app or install the browser extension to make sure you're seeing the full picture. Visit ground.news/The Glenn Show. That's ground.news/The Glenn Show. Okay, now what about capitalizing Black? I saw you had a piece on that in the last couple of weeks.
How do you feel about that? I personally, I don't capitalize it when I write, but the Times capitalizes it for me.
We made a decision with my newsletter editor, Mark Sussman, at the Substack that we were going to stay with lowercase b, unless, of course, it's the first word of a sentence. And that's caused a little bit of consternation because some people who want to contribute to the newsletter are confused about why you're not following the New York Times style guideline about capitalizing Black. I feel this way. I feel that I don't know how I tell somebody to not capitalize white if I'm capitalizing Black, and I don't want to capitalize white. Well, I want to capitalize white because white peoplehood is a reactionary and neo-fascistic notion. That whites are a people is very borderline racist in my mind. Are Blacks a people? Not really. I'm prepared to say it. Take me out if you want to. I don't see how Blacks can be a people and whites not be a people. I'm talking about immigrants from West Africa. I'm talking about people who have come into the society from the Caribbean. Are Blacks a people? If Blacks are a people, don't you have to allow that whites can be a people? We're Americans here. I don't like African American, frankly, but I'm not going to fight because we're way down the line on that. But when Jesse Jackson first started promoting this idea about African American, I never liked it. I was very cool on that. I mean, I can't tell you an ancestor of mine who was born in Africa. I can't name one.
Mm-mm.
I know my greats were enslaved persons who were captive and brought to the country in the Western Hemisphere from Africa. But I'm African American. That's a. But again, I'm not going to fight it. I mean, we're too far down the line on that.
You know, with the whole capitalization thing, I honestly just have a hard time caring about it. Capitalizing white would have a certain pleasing aesthetic aspect if you capitalize black, but white nationalists apparently like to capitalize white, and so that has deflected some people from advising capitalizing white too. And as of that, my whole response to that whole issue is just, I really don't care. There is activism, there's concern with society, and then there are these issues of gesture and symbol. And once again, if black is going to be capitalized, there you go with one more reason to be offended when someone doesn't do it, to be angry at somebody in their tweets because they're not capitalizing black and not using the capital B. And I just don't get the appeal of seeking ways to be offended. It's just in general, and this, I know I'm monotonous about this on this podcast, but I just feel that I wish some people would open up to the wonder of the world in a broader sense. There's so much to be interested in. Why be so focused on reasons to be offended about things having to do with being black when you are a black person? So yeah, I'm more concerned with the content of what I'm writing than whether or not I'm going to use some capital letter. It just seems like a distraction to me. The content is important. And I think that there's an analogy there with, what do black people need? Do black people need to see the name of our group written with a capital letter? Is that what black people need? Aren't there other things that should have more priority than that? So yeah, I just have a hard time caring, and I hate to seem so dismissive, but the problem is that it's something that I feel dismissive about. So yeah, I just can't get myself into caring.
It's not just linguistics, this is political, isn't it? I mean, the capital B is exactly, as I said, making an assertion about the existence of some kind of collectivity, some kind of aggregate, the black community. And, you know, I think there's a certain fictive, wishful almost aspect to that. I mean, the extreme opposite of this would be a kind of colorblind ideology in which you try to deny the relevance of racial categorization altogether. Isn't this Camille Foster's position? I have great respect for him, that he doesn't think of himself as a black person. He thinks that that's a outworn and antiquated and to some degree morally suspect move in terms of categorizing people. And he prefers to transcend that historical inheritance. So the capital B is a kind of staking out the other side of that debate and digging down into and reifying the socially constructive and to some degree fictive identitarian categorization, which is, quote, blackness, close quote.
Yeah. We hear about, well, there's such diversity among black people. Black people are not a monolith. And then there has to be this capital letter. And a part of me thinks, well, if there's going to be that particular unity, is the idea supposed to be that to be black is to walk around in fear of being mistreated by police officers? Because that seems to be a feeling that many people have, that our defining trait is that we have a problem with the cops. Because I'm not interested in capitalizing something because of fear of what somebody else might do to me. That strikes me as not prideful at all. And so, yeah, what is this unity? And more to the point, was there any question before 10 minutes ago about the black community and there being a body of people who consider themselves black and are seen as black and are doing black things? Was that unclear? Why do we need to capitalize a word in order to indicate that? It just seems sometimes like there are people who lack a sense of what there is to do or don't have enough to do. Just imagine talking to Dr. King. Imagine talking to Adam Clayton Powell. Imagine talking to, Roy Wilkins about whether or not we're going to write black with a capital letter or not, or whether or not you're going to write Negro with a capital letter or not.
They
would laugh in your face.
They say, you niggas must be doing pretty well if this is what you have to worry about.
That's exactly what they would have said. Yeah.
I'm putting mine, of course, and we should mention Thomas Chatterton William in his book, Portrait in Black and White, Unlearning Race, and his anguished consideration, he being the product of a mixed race marriage, his mother white, his father black, married to a French woman who I think you have to categorize as white, looking upon his children who are 1/4, quote unquote, black, staring into the 21st century and wondering in what sense and to what extent and for what reason has his child got to be black, and interrogating that whole presupposition. And I think that's where the fertile ground is going to lie, at the margins and in the intersections of racial identity. My lovely wife, LaJuan, is black. But two of her daughter is married to a white guy. Her adopted daughter is married to a Central European guy. He's a wonderful guy. They've got kids. I'm looking at these children with their curly hair and their light coffee with a lot of cream colored skin. And, they're going to grow up speaking different languages and stuff. Another friend has a German husband and a black mother, and the kids are speaking German from the cradle, and I'm saying, what are we doing by importing this, kind of way of thinking about ourselves, carrying it around? We won't let go. We're, I don't know if we're serving our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I don't mean only personally our descendants, but I mean those who come after us in the society at all well. Are we not shackling them with something that had a lot to do with our grandparents' lives, but may have much, much less to do with theirs?
Yeah, there's something coming. There's a debate that is coming about right now, and it's going to be messy because it's hard to allow that time passes. It's easy to get stuck in thinking in one way. And I think certain people are highly invested in a certain victim-focused sense of black identity. But the thing is, with these mongrel kids these days, these mutt biracial, multiracial kids, the idea among a certain kind of person who is, often about my age, maybe a decade younger, the idea is that they have to identify as black because of what they're going to go through. There's no point in talking about how they're neither one thing nor the other. Their blackness is going to mean that they're going to suffer discrimination. And there are many well-intentioned people who think they need to work on having a black identity. They need to be sent to some sort of black summer camp, that they have to understand what they're going to go through. And the question today is, what? What are they going to go through? Now, if we were talking about 1985, sure, I went through it, although I wouldn't say that it was so horrible, so life-defining. But yeah, little things happen. But today, what are they going to go through? And is what they're going to, quote unquote, go through enough that you should expect them to form a whole identity on the basis of it? And frankly, I really do think that America has come far enough that those kids do not need to think of themselves as black because of what they're going to go through. And you can tell by the response to Thomas Chatterton Williams in social media, an awful lot of people just will not hear this. There are black people who won't hear it. There are white people who think it's their responsibility to pretend that racism is so bad today. Or they look at the way the cop thing is depicted in the media, and they get the idea that to be a brown person is to walk around ever in danger of being manhandled by a cop in some way. And of course, they're getting a very distorted narrative from the media, despite the fact that some cops can be discriminatory. The problem is not what is shown. And so we have a problem there, because our conversation needs to evolve, but it would require openly admitting that racism now is not what it was 30 years ago. And many people just can't do it. And so, for example, I did a piece in the Times on this whole notion of diversity and the like. And I don't read the responses. I don't read the letters to the Times because I'm too busy writing the next piece. But things blow by in social media. And I saw one person write that I'm wrong, that my daughters shouldn't be thought of as diverse, that things have changed, because they know a black teenager who gets trailed in stores whenever he walks into the store. They said, my daughter is dating a black guy and he gets trailed in stores whenever they walk into a store. Now, if you think that that's what it's like to be a black person now, then I can understand how you would suppose that Thomas Chatterton Williams is out of court and anybody who's kind of brown needs to think of themselves as part of a beleaguered class of people. But the truth of the matter is this, and I go here very seldom. You don't want to say this about people. That's a lie about that boy. He is not trailed every time he walks into a store. It may have happened to him one time, maybe two times. It may have happened to him never. Because the thing about the trailing is that sometimes you walk into a store and it's the salespeople's job to come to you and try to sell you something. I am quite sure that a lot of people are interpreting that as being trailed. That boy's not trailed. Sometimes people just lie.
It's a poetic truth.
And another one, quickly.
Yeah.
Getting a cab in New York City, the idea that a black man can't get a cab. I have lived here for 20 years. I have never had that problem. That was a problem until about 2002, but things changed. And yet I remember about 10 years ago, a black man telling me that he can't get a cab in New York City.
Yeah, he's lying.
He was lying. He was just simply lying. Yet he was looking down on me as somebody who was in denial about racism. Sometimes people just lie. So, yeah.
Okay, let's change the subject a little bit if we can. We're not going to do, this is an announcement, we're not going to do part 2 of our response to the Q&A. I say this to readers of the newsletter who would go there to see what we have to say about the Q&A for the month of February, because, well, we're in the month of March now, and later in this month we will respond to the monthly Q&A, but we won't do a part 2. But there was a question that we didn't get to last time from the February Q&A. Subscribers to the newsletter get to submit questions that John and I will consider. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about, all you have to do is subscribe at glennloury.substack.com. There was a question that I thought was worth us considering, and it asked us basically to state what we think about the institution of tenure. The questioner noticed that I have tenure at Brown University and that you, John, do not have tenure at Columbia University, and wondered whether or not we had differing views or what our views might be about the institution of tenure, about its necessity, about what is good and bad about it, and so on. Your thoughts?
I think it's very important because it is possible to run afoul of fashionable ideas and have a certain kind of person hoping that they can oust you from your job. And that did not start in the spring of 2020. And so I understand the importance of the institution. There are people who would have been interested in seeing me leave my job or be ousted from my job at Berkeley because of some things that I've written about how interesting Creole languages are. That's way back in the late 90s. And tenure, I did have tenure at UC Berkeley, protected me from that kind of person destroying my life in that way. And so I think that's why tenure was instituted. Now, is it true that some people, after they get tenure, stop really doing any real work? That is a problem. But the reason I don't have tenure is rather dull. It has to do with administrative aspects of Columbia. And the mundane truth, the reason I don't have tenure at Columbia is not because Columbia won't give it to me or something like that. The only way that I could do, like Glenn, I don't know how you do it, the double career that I have where I both teach and research and then also participate in media, the only way that I can do that with 24-hour days is to not have the administrative responsibilities that you have when you get tenure. If I had tenure, I'd have to do more things helping to run the store at Columbia, and I simply wouldn't have time to write for the New York Times. So I take the risk. But no, tenure is a great thing, and I would be lying if I said that I consider myself to have had it, and therefore I got that status. If I had never had it, it would bother me. I would feel like I wasn't the real thing.
Well, I'm of mixed feelings about it. Yes, I do have tenure. I first got tenure in 1979 when I moved from assistant to associate professor at my first academic job, and I've been a tenured professor wherever I've gone ever since. I'm of two minds about it, actually. I think tenure in the absence of mandatory retirement can be a problem. because I think there's a curve of productivity over the life cycle, and you peak somewhere and then it tails off. Even if you're working hard, you're not as productive when you're, most people, almost all people, are not as productive when they're 65 or 70 or 75 as they were when they were 35 or 40 or 45. Varies from field to field, but I think that's generally true. And with tenure and no retirement requirement, people can stay well past their sell-by date. I mean, they can stay on into their 80s. The incentives there are kind of messed up. Now, the institution, I suppose, can try to encourage people to accept retirement by offering them various financial bonuses and securities and whatnot.
And they often do.
And they do. The ostensible primary rationale for tenure is to protect intellectual freedom so that people will not have to worry that their job security is jeopardized by them being, off the beaten path in terms of what their thinking is about controversial matters. And there are cases, I think of Amy Wax at the University of Pennsylvania, who is under severe fire as we speak. I mean, she would be gone, I feel confident, but for tenure from the law school at the University of Pennsylvania.
She would have been gone 3 years ago.
Yeah. Because of her controversial views about race and about immigration and about culture and whatever else. And I'm not endorsing those views here. I need to say some of her offending statements have been made right here at the Glenn Show, and I will continue from time to time to talk to Amy Wax here at the Glenn Show because I think she's interesting, and in a way, maybe because I'm just thumbing my noses at the cancel people who don't want to give her any platform whatsoever. But that's not the primary reason. I think the stuff that she talks about is worth arguing about. So anyway, but never mind. But for tenure, she'd be gone. There are cases like that. My case, I think the esteem of one's colleagues ought to be the primary motivation for academic productivity, not the idea that I'm going to get this brass ring of tenure and then I can relax. I'm going to get past this hurdle and then I'll be golden and then, and I'll be assured no matter what I do. So I'm of two minds about it, actually.
There's no doubt that an awful lot of people after tenure stop being as productive. There's a kind of professor who really enjoys administration more than they enjoy doing research and writing. I've always found that peculiar, but there's a certain type who does what they're supposed to do for 7 years, maybe 7 years and change. They get the tenure. Then what they really want to become is a dean of some sort. And they start doing that and they don't really write or research much again. Then there's a kind who isn't especially interested in being a dean, but we know who never really does any real work again. Often they are very dedicated teachers, though. And the idea is that they're going to instruct students and inspire students. They like undergraduates and also they mentor graduates, but they don't really do much work of their own. And the question is, what is the university supposed to be for? And I'm not talking about people who are just complete deadwood, but they're people who would really rather instruct than do research and write long sentences and long papers that, frankly, not many people are going to read anyway. I can kind of understand that. And I guess I understand the kind of person who gets tenure and then would rather run the school than do research. I can kind of understand that. Although sometimes I wonder, shouldn't there be a kind of person who doesn't have to go through the hoops of getting the tenure at all and just, goes to deaning school or something like that? But yeah, there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of mission creep in what the modern university is. And tenure is a funny thing because it kind of snakes through a lot of unstated assumptions and outdated assumptions. There are too many schools anyway. That's another thing. Too many people have to go to college at all. There's a lot there to unpack.
It's not the only alternative. You could consider long-term contracts that don't have to be lifetime. You could consider 10-year appointments that would be renewable.
That's what I have.
Where there'd be some guarantees that you couldn't cancel the contract just because the person was a Trump voter or something like that. Mm-hmm. But, John, there's a war raging between Russia and Ukraine. I know we're not supposed to be experts on foreign policy here. I feel like if we didn't say something about at least acknowledging that as we speak, we're aware of what's unfolding. This is the largest, most concerning conflict in Europe since the Second World War. How does it affect us? Are you confident? Maybe I can ask you this: in the way that our esteemed political and military leadership are reacting to the conflict. Did you hear what the president had to say in his State of the Union about it? There are people who are saying that, I mean, here's Tucker Carlson's take. He says, I was wrong, and he was wrong because he downplayed the possibility of conflict when the Biden administration were leaking their accurate security forecasts that the massing militarization on the border was going to lead to an incursion. They were predicting it. They got the day wrong, but they didn't get the fact wrong. And Carlson had downplayed that. He had poo-pooed that. And he says, here's why I got it wrong. I got it wrong because when I saw Kamala Harris, our incompetent vice president, this is Tucker Carlson, talking to the Europeans, I had to figure there was nothing really that serious going on. Otherwise, they would have sent somebody who was actually a more competent representative of the government than Kamala Harris. So Tucker makes 2 points there, right? He says, it's not that I underestimated Putin, it's that I overestimated Biden. And he makes his point that Kamala Harris is, on his terms, an empty suit. What do you think about how it is that our government is handling the crisis?
Well, this is a tough one because I think there's all indication that what Russia is going to do is incinerate several Ukrainian cities, and Putin wants to take Ukraine over. Putin thinks Ukraine should be part of Russia, is part of Russia, and always was, and has never gotten over it being allowed to be its own nation. That's what he wants. That has been an obsession of his. And so there's no dealing with him. And the only way to stop this would be to arm the Ukrainians to such an extent that they could keep that from happening. And that seems to be pretty much impossible. Therefore, we would have to go. There's this notion that we're absolutely not going to send troops. But frankly, to reverse this, I mean, I'm no military expert, but it would seem to me that we would have to send some to keep that from happening. And the scary thing is that there are many, 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 many people in Russia who are genuinely under the impression, because of media distortion, I think it's because of media distortion, that this was a defense operation, that there really was a critical mass of people in eastern Ukraine who were trying to do Russia in, and they were going to have this uprising and start killing ethnic Russians, et cetera, and that therefore this was needed, and that NATO was possibly, encircling and was threatening to attack Russia. It was against Russia. And, there are clips that can be made to look like that. And so a critical mass of the people are under the impression that this really had to happen, and there's very little way for them to see otherwise. So it's a very sad thing because this is very Hitler. Putin sees Ukraine as a state that seceded. Ukraine sees itself as an independent nation and culture with its own history, but Putin won't have it, and Ukraine can't defend itself from what's going on. This is in my lifetime, this is the first time I've ever seen this. It's like seeing something that's supposed to be in black and white or in some picture book. It's appalling. And, the way Russians feel about it, the way Russian Americans feel about it, the way Ukrainians feel about it, I'm still taking it all in. I'm
impressed by Zelensky.
But many Russians think it's good. That's another scary thing about it.
Excuse me. I think we should actually dwell on that for a moment. Many Russians are behind what Putin is doing. I hear from a Russian friend of mine with whom I have communication who is dead set against this war and is humiliated and embarrassed that his country has undertaken such an action, but that he's a 30-something. Their parents' generation, there's a lot of nationalistic, flag-waving, pro-Russian support for the action that Putin is undertaking in Russia. Yeah. I was just going to say that Zelensky, this guy who comes out and does these press conferences in a T-shirt or, combat fatigues and whatnot, who says, I won't leave Kyiv. no matter what. And gives an address to the European Union in which he says, this may be the last time you see me alive, because he knows, what well may be coming. Gosh, it's really horrible. The bravery of the Ukrainian people fighting back, preparing themselves, steeling themselves for the worst. Densely populated cities under bombardment, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands will die before this is over.
1 out of 40 people have already left the country.
It's awful. It's awful. The humanitarian consequences and so on, it's awful. What of the geopolitical consequences? We can't really repel the Russian attack on Ukraine. We could slow it down. A no-fly zone? Are we really going to go to war with Russia? We're going to shoot down Russian aircraft who violate a no-fly zone? Are we going to attack Russian anti-aircraft batteries to ensure that our planes are not endangered? Are we going to take a step into what could escalate into something that could be very, very awful? Are the principles at stake worth that much to us? Feels to me like the answer there ultimately is no. But that being the case, you can then work backwards to say, therefore, they're not going to do that. The Russians know we're not going to do that. And so they can call our bluff. We better be careful not to promise stuff that we can't deliver on. Are the financial sanctions going to be enough? Gosh, I doubt it, frankly.
Putin doesn't care. If history
is any guide.
It won't affect him, so he doesn't care. Is
destroying the Russian economy really in our interest in the longer run? Are we trying to induce an internal regime change dynamic, a coup d'etat, to get Putin out of power because we inflict so much pain on the Russian people or on certain Russian people that they move to? Do we know what comes in his wake? If we are successful in somehow getting Putin out of power, is it really just Putin? I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions. Mm-hmm. But
the sanctions
I haven't seen anything like this. Pardon?
The sanctions won't matter. He doesn't care. It's about him and the oligarchs and people suffering. As far as he's concerned, it all makes sense because we have to bring Ukraine back into the fold, and some people are just going to have to suffer. He's not a nice person, and he has a completely different sense of what he's for than we would suppose. So yeah, it's a ghastly situation because apparently, if we're not going to go put people on the ground, if we're not going to have World War III, then Ukraine, it would seem, is lost, and he gets what he wants, and then life goes on, and then of course he's going to want other regions back. Yeah, this is not how it was supposed to go.
Well, to draw a connection between the two parts of this conversation, it does make the race debate in America seem small when you put it into the global geopolitical context of the survival of nations and of the possibility of total war. Maybe we could all, God forbid, escalating conflict would be enough to shock us all into a sense of recognition that our Americanness is much more important than our blackness or our whiteness or our Asianness or whatever it might be.
That never works. I remember this after 9/11. I remember having a conversation with Stanley Crouch. He was thinking about putting together a volume of Black writers, and the volume was going to be called Blacks After the Bomb. And he was thinking that based on what 9/11 seemed to signify, the idea of, someone sitting in their office complaining about something a white person said about their hair or, freak of nature, et cetera, would seem trivial, and that Black people would start thinking of themselves as Americans first. Yeah. Well, look how that went. And so I don't know if that's going to happen here either. I think that we're going to have both Ukraine being taken over by Russia, and we're going to have people here pretending that Negro is a slur. The two things are going to coexist.
By the way, audience, those who don't know, this is the late, great Stanley Crouch, author of, amongst other things, Notes of a Hanging Judge, a collection of critical essays. Stanley, the jazz critic who was with Wynton Marsalis, running the jazz program at what do y'all call that?
Jazz at Lincoln Center.
At the Lincoln Center, yeah, indeed. Gravelly voice. Oh, man, don't you know, race is over. I can remember him saying that to me. Race is over. which is very much in the spirit of what he was trying to do with you. But race, sadly, or is it sad? I guess that's a debate.
Not going to be over for a long time.
It's not over yet. And therefore, the Black Guys will be back in 2 weeks talking the same kind of talk. You should join us. Check us out. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Glenn.